It's 1607, and 3 ships of the Virginia Company have arrived in Virginia to establish Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in the Americas. Being chartered by a company, its chief goal was to make money for those who had invested in it. Over the following 150 years, the Virginia colony would grow to cover this territory, become a crown colony directly governed by the British monarch, and become one of the 13 colonies that made up British North America, the subject of today's video.
Hey, what about me?
Shut up, Canada, this video is not about you. After Virginia came Massachusetts in 1629, which, like Virginia, was initially established under the charter of a company. Unlike Virginia, however, Massachusetts was initially settled by around 1,000 Puritans seeking refuge from religious persecution in England. The establishment of colonies to escape religious persecution is a theme which we will see again. 1629 also saw the creation of the province of New Hampshire, which was established after the 1623 joint land claims of Captain John Mason and Sir Ferdinando Gorges were split at the Piscatka River. The land west of the river became the province of New Hampshire, while the land east of the river would end up as the province of Maine, which contained parts of what are now the U.S. states of Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire, as well as the Canadian provinces of New Brunswick and Quebec. 18 years later, in 1632, the province of Maryland was established by Cecil Calvert, 2nd Baron Baltimore, whose father had long hoped to establish a New World colony which could serve as a refuge for Catholics, who had been facing persecution across much of Europe since the beginning of the Protestant Reformation in 1517. Provincial Maryland, however, saw much religious conflict between Anglicans, Puritans, Catholics, and Quakers, leading to the ousting of the Catholic governor by Puritan rebels in 1689. A few years after Maryland came Connecticut Colony in 1636, which was established by Thomas Hooker after a disagreement with Puritan leaders in Massachusetts. Like in Massachusetts, we again see an English colony that was established as a result of a religious conflict, although in this case it was a mere disagreement rather than a full-on case of religious persecution like with Massachusetts. After Maryland came the Colony of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, which, like Maryland, was formed by a minister. In this case, Roger Williams, who, in October of 1635, was summoned to appear before the General Court in Boston, which convicted him of sedition and heresy and declared him to have spread, quote, diverse, new, and dangerous opinions, for which he was to be banished from Massachusetts. By the spring of 1636, he and his followers had settled in what is now Rhode Island. In August of 1637, the Providence Civil Compact was created, the first instance in colonial America of a declaration of a separation of church and state. A few years later, in 1638, the first European settlers arrived in what would become Delaware. These settlers were Swedes, who established the colony of New Sweden at what is now the city of Wilmington. In a similar fashion to New York, the colony was captured by the Dutch in 1655 and annexed into New Netherland. When the English took control of New Netherland in 1664, they also took control of what would become the province of Pennsylvania, which will be discussed later in this video. Where does Delaware factor into this? Well, in December of 1682, the General Assembly of the Province of Pennsylvania and 3 lower counties on the Delaware first met. That's right, Delaware was not actually its own British colony, but was instead a semi-autonomous region of the province of Pennsylvania, with its official name being the Lower Counties on the Delaware. In March of 1663, King Charles II of England issued a charter to a group of 8 English noblemen which made them the Lords Proprietor of Carolina. Charles did this to reward them for helping to restore him to the English throne during the Second English Civil War, which is another topic for another video. The province of Carolina continued to be run this way for the next 49 years, when the northern half, known as Albemarle Province, became the colony of North Carolina, and the southern half, known as Clarendon Province, became the colony of South Carolina, a measure which was taken in order to make the colony easier to govern. Like many of the other colonies of British North America, New Jersey was once part of the Dutch colony of New Netherland before coming under English control in 1664. Things changed in 1674, however, as that was when the province was split into East Jersey and West Jersey, which almost immediately led to border disputes over where the line between East and West was, leading to the reuniting of the two Jerseys 28 years later in 1702, as it would remain thereafter. The province of Pennsylvania was another one of the 13 colonies which transferred from Dutch to English control as a result of the Second Anglo-Dutch War, so I won't dwell too much on that. I will, however, dwell on the colony's founder, William Penn. As a Quaker, Penn sought to establish a colony in which Quakers could freely practice their beliefs, something which they had not been able to do elsewhere. Their beliefs were reflected in the colony's legal system, which abolished the death penalty and forbade Pennsylvanians from taking the Lord's name in vain and wasting time on such worldly amusements as card games and so-called riotous sports. In accordance with their faith, the Quakers granted those living in the colony a great deal of religious freedom, with William Penn saying in 1701 that, quote, "All persons who profess to believe in Jesus Christ the Savior shall be capable to serve this government in any capacity, he solemnly promising allegiance to the king and fidelity to the proprietary and governor, and taking the attests as now established." This, however, was not extended to the Lenape tribe, whose beliefs were often demonized, with colonists forbidden from selling alcohol to Native Americans due to a belief that, quote, "Indians are not able to govern themselves in their use of it." For over 30 years after the establishment of the province of Pennsylvania, no more colonies were established in British North America. Perhaps more would have been established if not for the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which designated the land west of the Appalachian Mountains as an Indian Reserve, and forbade any settlement on that land. There was, however, one more colony that was established before these 13 colonies gained their independence in 1776. This was the province of Georgia, established in 1732. The charter for this colony was granted to James Oglethorpe, who hoped to build the colony into what he saw as a utopian society in which slavery was banned, the consumption of alcohol was prohibited, and many restrictions were placed on the sale and ownership of land. By the early 1750s, however, slavery had been permitted, and by the time of the Revolutionary War, Georgia had become much like the other southern colonies, with its economy reliant on slavery and based on cash crops like cotton and rice. So what have we learned today? Well, a lot of these colonies were once controlled by either the Swedish or Dutch, and that many of them were formed as a result of religious differences. This is something that would be seen again throughout American history, the instigation of imperialist efforts in order to further ideological goals. In the 1840s, thousands of Mormons traveled westwards to what became Utah in order to practice their religion as they saw fit, hearkening back to the Puritans who originally settled in Virginia. Even into the 20th century, the United States continued its imperialist efforts for ideological reasons, chiefly as part of the Cold War, during which conflicts like the Vietnam War took place and saw the United States prop up the capitalist government of South Vietnam as a counter to the communist North Vietnam. As with much of human history, things change, but so much stays the same. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope you learned something today.